Morning, sir.
Morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for all of you for joining another session of SDP from Eduko Pathways. We have Dr. Mary D. Rice with us today. She's the Associate Professor at the School of Psychology, Faculty of Science and Engineering, University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Two things before we start our session today. As you can see, there's a lot of participations here. So please, for the benefit of everyone, put yourself on mute. Keep yourself on mute till the whole session is over. It should be just 1 hour. And after that, Dr. Mariki will have ample time for all of you to ask your questions to her. Okay, so write down your questions if you have something in between the session, but please, I would request all of you to please put yourself on mute, okay, so that everyone can properly listen to what she is going to say today. The other thing is today we'll be sharing a response link, maybe in the next 5 minutes. That response link, hold on to that response link. Once the session is almost over, you have to answer one question correctly, and you have to write something about the session to get the certification from the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. So these are the two things I wanted to put out. Thank you all for joining today's event. The ability to sense the feeling of others and predict their behavior is something that individuals learn and develop in their childhood. Today, we'll definitely learn a lot more of that from Dr. Mariki. So we hope you are all as excited as we are here. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to all of you our Chief Executive Officer of Eduko Pathways, Mr. Thomas Gomes. So Mr. Thomas Gomes, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Tushar. Hello, everyone. I welcome you all to this exciting workshop today. And I believe this is a very unique opportunity that does not come very often. And I would like to thank C and the team, the University of Nottingham, Malaysia, for supporting us organizing such an exciting workshop. Big thanks to Dr. Mariki for your time and effort that you put in preparing for this workshop today. And I'm sure all our participants will greatly benefit from this event. And I would also like to thank to all my colleagues at the Eduko Pathways who has been working really hard to make this event a successful one. And the result we see, we have so many participants already. I know you all are waiting for the session to start. And before I hand it over to Dr. Mariki, as Tushar said, I would request all of you to please put yourself on mute unless you're speaking. This will help us to run the workshop smoothly. So without further ado, Dr. Mariki, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Just to check, can you now see my slides but not my notes?
Not yet, Dr. Mariki.
Oh, wait.
Yep, that's good.
Okay, so you can see my slides and not my notes, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Then I'll start with my session. Thank you very much all for being here. It's really a pleasure to do this workshop, and I really appreciate that there are so many people who are interested in this topic. I'm biased, obviously. I think it's an interesting topic as well because it's one of my main fields of interest. So yeah, by the way, so this is our very lovely campus in Malaysia, and unfortunately, like yourself, we're in a lockdown currently, so I haven't been here for some months already, I think, and I cannot wait to go back because it's a really nice atmosphere, and I really enjoy working there. But that's not what this talk is about. What this talk is about is mainly about theory of mind, and hopefully by the end of this session you will all understand what it is. It sounds more complicated than it is. It's actually something really simple. But first, I'll quickly introduce myself. I'll tell a bit about who I am so that you know who you're listening to. I'll say a little bit about psychology at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. And then I'll introduce theory of mind. And at the end of the session, we'll do a quick, brief theory of mind test. So I'll introduce that later. So who am I? My name is Marieke de Vries. And I did my master's and PhD in clinical neuropsychology at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. That's also where I'm from. And 4.5 years ago, I moved to Malaysia. And I started to work as an assistant professor at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia, and then became an associate last year. My lecture topics, so the topics that I teach about are developmental psychology, clinical psychology, autism, and I also coordinate our summer internships. I actually set the summer internships up because I think it's very relevant to get a lot of real life experience during your study as well. My research, so my main focus of, or my main topic of interest is autism and executive functioning in autism. Executive functioning is a term that you might or might not know, but it's actually a term for our brain mechanisms that influence how we interact with our environment. So working memory, how we think, how we can react very quickly, how we can stop a certain reaction, how we can multitask. So those kind of functions. And people with autism tend to have difficulties with those functions. I'm very interested in the role of culture in how, for example, autism is interpreted. I will not talk about executive functions today, so that very brief introduction, you can forget about that. I will talk a bit more about autism, because that's linked to theory of mind as well. But first, psychology at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. I thought it might clarify a little bit about the structure of our university. Don't worry, I'll keep it brief. So there's the University of Nottingham. There's 3 campuses, one in the UK, one in Malaysia, and one in China. I will not talk about the UK and China because I don't work there. And in Malaysia, we have 2 faculties, so kind of 2 different, well, departments. The Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, again, I will not talk about that because I don't work there. And at the Faculty of Science and Engineering, we have a lot of science schools, engineering departments, and one of the science schools is the School of Psychology. And in our School of Psychology, we're now with 13 lecturers. We actually have 2 courses that students can do, psychology or psychology and cognitive neuroscience. And there's quite some overlap between the 2, but the main difference is that if someone chooses to do psychology and cognitive neuroscience, there's more focus on how the brain works and cognition. Yeah, that's a slightly different approach, but the broad psychological background that's being taught in both courses. So what exactly is psychology? Psychology is, the word is made up of psyche and logia, which means mind or soul and word or reason. So it's actually the study of the mind and the brain. So it's the study about how our mind actually works. And that's actually a really, really broad field because the mind and the brain influences everything we do. It influences behavior, communication, how we talk to one another, memory. And memory on itself is a very broad construct because you have long-term memory about, well, your childhood, about experiences. But you also have working memory, which is the memory that you use if you have to remember what kind of groceries you have to buy, for example, and you have to update it all the time. Thoughts, emotions, and obviously more structured how the brain works. So what kind of structures in the brain are involved with different kind of processes. So it's a very, very broad field in itself. So at our school, what it normally looks like, and I here did not make a distinction between psychology and cognitive neuroscience, because in essence, there's quite some overlap. The difference is that if you do cognitive neuroscience, you have to do more neuroscience related modules. So that's the main difference. So you have some optional choices in the second year. And if you do neuroscience, then you would have to do more neuroscience modules. So in the first year, there's cognitive psychology, and there's a follow-up of that in the second year. And then there's the introduction in cognitive neuroscience and biopsychology, developmental psychology, which I lecture, social psychology, and practical and statistical methods. Because one of the main important things in our school is that you learn how to do scientific research. So if you study psychology, you don't immediately become a clinical psychologist. The basic is that you learn how to do scientific research, learn how the brain works, how the mind works. And as a follow-up, you could become a clinical psychologist, but at our school, we train you to be a scientific researcher. In the second year, there's a lot of follow-up on that, and there's a bit more flexibility. You can also do some optional modules in other schools from other faculties. And there's, social and developmental psychology is what I lecture, and there's other options like personality and individual differences, conceptual and historical issues. So there's quite, it becomes a bit broader. In the third year, there's a huge research project, which is like 1/3 of your final year. It's called the final year project. It's where you have to do a full project all on your own. So that's a very important topic. And then there's quite some optional modules as well. And these modules are quite often the modules that are more specialized. So I do a full module about autism, and I do a full module about clinical psychology, because those are my fields of expertise mostly. And other lecturers do the same about their fields of expertise, like autobiographical memory, bilingualism, computational modeling, or evolution of human behavior. A little bit about the future perspectives. I already said that we do not train you to be clinical psychologists, but we do teach you a lot about what the human mind works, how the human mind works. And there's, in a broad sense, you can actually do a lot with psychology, mainly because of that broad scientific basic structure. But there's, kind of like 3 options you kind of, our students end up going to. One is the corporate setting. So for example, at a human resource department, becoming a manager, going into marketing or research, or corporate research. Becoming a clinical psychologist, like counseling, doing therapies, work at an autism center or at a hospital, for example. Or you can end up in the academic setting, where you mainly do teaching and research. I tried a bit of everything. I worked as a clinical psychologist, but before I could do that, I actually worked at the bank in a corporate setting. And I ended up here where I do teaching and research, which I really enjoy, although clinical psychology is still something that's always at the back of my mind as well, because I really love doing that as well. So there's a lot of options, and I think all of them are quite promising. But now the main topic of today, theory of mind. So some people think that if you become a psychologist, you learn how to read minds. That is certainly not true. That's not what we train students to do at all, simply because it's not possible to teach someone to read other people's minds. However, in general, people are quite good at reading minds. So can we read minds? Actually, yes, we human beings are quite good at reading minds. Think about if you interact with someone, that sometimes you already have an idea about what someone thinks or feels or is about to say, even if you haven't spoken yet, simply by looking at their emotions, looking at their whole body posture, other kind of body language. Moreover, you might have more background information. You might run into someone who you know has just been dumped by their boyfriend or girlfriend, or maybe you run into someone who just has won a big prize or the lottery. So you might already have kind of an indication or a bit more information about, well, in what kind of mindset people are. And we tend to use that a lot in social interaction. But can we do it perfectly? No, obviously not, because if we could perfectly read other people's minds, then we wouldn't need to talk anymore, and we still really need to talk. So we cannot read minds, because otherwise, if you could all read my mind, I could just stop this presentation right now and sit still, and you could just read my mind. So it doesn't work like that. But we do use a lot of additional information in our day-to-day interaction and conversations with other people that that help us to kind of understand what's going on in other people's mind, or explain why they, for example, respond in a certain way. And I think currently this might have become a bit more obvious. I mean, if you run into someone in real life, and currently we're all in lockdown, so that doesn't happen that often. But then you can see someone as a whole. You see the body posture and the language and the body language, and so that helps you to kind of see what kind of state someone is in. If you see someone online and if they don't put their camera on, then that makes it a lot more difficult. And if they're a little bit quiet, then it makes it even more difficult. So if I lecture in real life, I can kind of look around. I can see whether my students are falling asleep, whether they look really puzzled, even if they don't say anything at all. But if I lecture online, I cannot really see what's going on with my students. I can just see, well, mainly my own screen, and that's it. And sometimes some faces from the people who do put on their cameras, but it's more limited. But my point is, in daily life, normally, if you really see someone, you are quite well able to read other people's minds. Not because we're all psychologists or psychic, but just because we're human beings. So what is theory of mind? It's the insights that people have mental states and that these influence our behavior. So mental states are, for example, beliefs, desires, or goals. And theory of mind helps us to predict and explain other people's actions. So theory of mind is not only important, it's actually essential for social interaction. It's very, very relevant for a normal social interaction. So if you want to study theory of mind, you have to have a measure or a task to measure theory of mind with. So for example, at some point, we kind of know now that people are quite good at reading other people's minds to a certain extent. It's called theory of mind, not reading of the mind, because we form a theory of other people's mind and not the truth about other people's mind, because we don't know that. So how do we study theory of mind? Well, there's this specific task that has been developed by Simon Baron Cohen. I didn't add the reference here, which is not very good, but I did reference him later. So that's called the false belief task, 𝐶𝐸 task. And a false belief task is a task where something happens and someone has an incorrect belief about the reality. So in this case, what you see on this picture, there's Sally here on the left and there's Anne here on the right. And Sally puts her ball in a basket and then Sally goes away. And then while Sally is away, so she's not aware of what's happening, and moves the basket from moves the ball from the box to the okay, it's a very complicated task apparently, and moves the ball from the basket to the box. So the question is, to test whether someone has a theory of mind, is where will Sally, if she comes back, look for her ball? And so we, as viewers, we know where the ball actually is, because the ball is actually in the box right now, because Anne moved it there. But Sally doesn't know this. So if you have a well-developed theory of mind, you would understand that the correct answer is that Sally would probably look in the basket, because that's where she left the ball. Well, seems to be a rather straightforward task, but for small children, this is not that straightforward. So young children tend to give incorrect responses here. They cannot inhibit, or they cannot guess what Sally really thinks. So they will just think she will look in the box because that's where the ball actually is. And they just think, well, she will look there because the ball is there. And they cannot think, well, okay, she doesn't know, because that needs a lot of interpretation. So why is this more useful than a true belief task? If it's a true belief task, then it's the same as just saying what I think where the ball is, and I know where the ball is. So it's not giving an insight in what someone else thinks, which is not in line with what I think. And an essential part of theory of mind is that what I think is not necessarily the same as what someone else thinks. We might both have different information. For example, I know that the ball is in the box right now, but Sally doesn't. We might, but it's in a broader perspective. You might have very different points of view about different situations based on a much broader background as well. So this is a simple, well, false belief task, so to say. So what we know about theory of mind and false belief tasks is that 3-year-old children tend to fail this task. So they would say the ball is in the box instead of the ball, that Sally would think the ball would be in the basket. So they don't understand that others may hold an incorrect belief, that what Sally thinks might be incorrect, but yet it is what she thinks. And they also don't seem to understand that their own minds might be different from other minds. So young children, I'm not sure if you've ever encountered this, they cannot understand that you, for example, don't understand what they're saying, because they think that what they think is the same as what you think. 4-year-old children are a lot better. So they tend to pass false belief tasks. They give the correct answer here. So they understand that Sally has a different point of view from their own point of view. So they understand that other people act upon their own view of reality, which might or might not be correct. And they can also distinguish between their own thoughts and other people's thoughts. So that's the basic essential part of theory of mind. So the idea is that around 4 years of age, children develop theory of mind. However, there's a critical note to be made, and that's that this task needs children to answer questions verbally. They have to say, Sally will look in the basket. And at a younger age, children's verbal abilities and their memory and a lot of other cognitive abilities are not that well developed yet. So maybe it's not so much theory of mind that's not well developed yet. It might be other cognitive things that's going on. And indeed, it seems that an implicit false belief task, so where they don't have to give an answer, but just, for example, point at the correct response, look at the correct response, you can just look where children look at, they seem to be able to give correct responses a lot earlier, by 15 months of age already. So it seems that children do have some kind of indication of what other people might think at an earlier age, but they might not be aware of it yet, or they might not be able to explicitly state that in words. But for now, I think it's important that by 4 years of age, most children develop an explicit theory of mind where they can also explain what's going on and understand it really. Yeah, here's the reference, Simon Baron-Cohen. He also used the Sally N task. And in this case, he compared children with autism, children without any problems, typically developing, and children with Down syndrome. And what this study showed is that 80% of the autistic children failed the Sally N task, even though they were above the age of 4. Interestingly, children with Down syndrome, they did quite well on the task, as similarly to typically developing children. And why is this relevant? This is relevant because that means that it's not necessarily learning difficulty or a general developmental delay, because we know that children with Down syndrome have learning difficulties and general developmental delays. And yet they don't have theory of mind problems. While with autism, definitely not all children with autism have learning difficulties or general developmental delays, well, in certain extent, but they might be quite smart, actually. They might have a quite high IQ, and yet they cannot do well on this task. So theory of mind difficulties are quite specific to children with autism. So we know that autistic children are not very good mind readers. And what exactly is autism? Autism is a condition, and it consists of two main important difficulties. The first one is difficulties in social communication and social interaction. And the second difficulty is that they show restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. So they have difficulties in social interaction with other people, with other children, to respond appropriately in certain situations, to understand social situations, and they tend to show the same kind of behaviors over and over again. So they have a preference for that kind of repetition. It happens early in development. So even if children are only, or if adults are only diagnosed later on, then if you ask back about their development, there were always already difficulties early in development. And it causes significant impairments in daily life. So this is according to the DSM-5, which is like the psychological handbooks of psychiatric disorders. So this is how it's defined. And one of the main theories about autism is that these difficulties that they have in daily life might be linked to theory of mind difficulties. So for the first difficulty, social interaction, if you are not really good at predicting what other people are going to do, to understand that other people might have a different point of view, or to kind of understand emotions in other people, that makes social interaction quite difficult. So that's where theory of mind could at least partly explain those social difficulties. It could less well explain the repetitive behaviors, although it might explain why people do the same thing over and over again, because that gives more structure. If you don't really understand what's going on all the time because you don't have that kind of insight, then doing things the same makes it easier to deal with daily life interactions. This is not the only cognitive theories. There's more. I could talk about autism for hours, but I'm not going to do that today. But I think, well, the take-home message here is that we know that people with autism tend to have difficulties in theory of mind. And we also know that younger children have that. So in sum, young children are not very good mind readers. Autistic people are also not very good mind readers. But what about typically developed adults or young adults or adolescents, students? What about you? So what I want to do now is do a theory of mind task. And I want to very explicitly say, this is not a diagnostic measure. This is more, I included this as kind of a fun activity. This study has been done in real students as well. And I'll share the outcomes at the end of this workshop too. But what I actually want to show you is that actually we are quite good mind readers, and even better than we might expect. So I'm going to try this out with you. If somehow you do not do very well on this task, which is very well possible, please do not worry. This is really not a measure of what a good mind reader individual people are. This is just a scientific task. It's no diagnostic tool whatsoever. It's just kind of to give an example of what psychological research can look like and how that's being done, and just to give an example. So in this study, what they did, this material that I'll be sharing with you is based on a real study from 2014. Using other minds as a window onto the world, guessing what happened from clues in behavior. And the question is, can individuals with and without autism in this study infer what kind of scenario happened to someone? So I would like to try this with you. And what I will do is I will show you 4 brief video clips, actually 8 in total, but I'll start with 4. And I'll tell you a bit about what happened. So these are participants to scientific research. If you study psychology, you probably are going to participate in scientific research. I know I did it quite a lot. And so normally you don't, well, you know a little bit about what's going to happen. But these students, participants, they came into a room and they had a brief encounter with the experimenter. And the question I want to ask you now is what happens between the experimenter and these participants? So what I'll do is I will show you these brief videos, but I would want you to give the answers to my questions as well. So if you could go to 𝐄𝐃𝐲𝐿.com, you can just do that on your mobile phone. I know there's a lot of people in this meeting, and in all honesty, I don't know whether my 𝐄𝐃𝐲 account can handle that many people, but if at least some of you would like to participate, that would be really nice. And in 𝐄𝐃𝐲𝐿.com, there's two options. You can choose for teacher login or student login. Well, I'm the teacher in this case, so you are going to be the students. So please choose student login. And then you have to enter a room name. And that room name is Marika, my name, 7733. So I'm just going to check whether anyone actually enters 𝐄𝐃𝐲𝐿. So you don't have to answer anything yet because I first have to show you the video. I see that many people managed to get in. That's really nice. I'll wait a little bit because I want to give you the time to log into 𝐄𝐃𝐲𝐿. So okay, well, there's 115 in the 𝐄𝐃𝐲𝐿 right now, so I'll go to the next slide. So the question is very simple. You can just type a very brief answer. Don't make it into an essay. And I will not show you 𝐄𝐃𝐲𝐿. I'll just kind of read some of the answers. So the question here, I'll show you this. It's a very brief video. I'll show, there's no sound. So don't expect any sound. It's just very, very brief. And the question is, what do you think happened to this girl, woman? Show it one more time. Okay, let me see what kind of answers I got. She was confused, no idea. She's a jolly mind. She has depression. That's a very a very quick diagnosis. Face-to-face interview, exam, a happy moment. She gets a compliment. She's talking to someone. She's a little embarrassed. She greets another person. She seems shy and hesitantly to answer. You're giving a lot of questions, so I'll just pick some out. She received the question and answered with a smile. She's asked an embarrassing question. She's getting shy. What you see here is that you all automatically have some answers about what kind of mindset she might be in. So that's quite interesting, I think. What happened to her is that someone gave her a compliment. And I have definitely read that answer. So one of you at least, and I think actually many, but there's way too many answers to check. I might do that later on. Actually guessed correctly from a very, very brief video that she got a compliment. So that shows how well people actually are in mind reading. So I think that's quite interesting. So the next very brief video. So what do you think happened to this person? I'll first have to go to the next question on Socrative. Yeah, go ahead. He's confused. It's actually interesting that you don't see each other's answers, and quite a couple of you say he's confused. He also gets a compliment. He's a bit confused and nervous. He couldn't answer a question. He's slightly embarrassed. Yeah, a lot of people think he seems to be a bit frustrated. He might be confused, embarrassed. Yeah, so there's a lot of confused and embarrassed. So what actually happened to this person is that someone told him a joke. I'll share the joke with you later, which might explain his somewhat confused reaction. So this shows that we're not perfect mind readers, but we do tend to try to read other people's minds. The third test. Show it one more time. She's embarrassed, says someone. She's agreeing to something. She's a bit puzzled, nervous, surprised, a bit angry, frustrated. She's humorous. Suddenly meets an old friend. She doesn't know what to say. She's surprised. She's angry and slightly irritated. She's a bit shocked. Well, I'll tell you what happened. Someone told her a brief story. And again, I'll share the story with you quickly later on, so you also understand why she responds the way she responds. So again, you did very well, because actually this really describes how she probably feels. Then the final of these 4 videos. So what happened to this girl? She's tired of waiting. She's sad, she's paying attention. She's lost something. Maybe a bit nervous, attentive. She's reading something. A bit tense. Maybe a bit upset, tired. So what actually happened is, what actually happened is that she's just waiting. So in this case, actually nothing happens to her. And the participants in the study did not know they were already taken on video. Obviously, in hindsight, they all agreed that this material could be used. If they hadn't agreed, we would never use this. So she's just waiting. She's just waiting for the experimenter to return, and she's in an empty room doing nothing. So the actual study, because now I just asked you to guess very randomly and just completely guess, but in the actual study, they had a bit more information. So can individuals with and without autism infer what scenario happened to someone? And there were 4 scenarios. So there was a joke, waiting, story, and compliment. So I showed you one of every one of them. Just to give you a bit more insight, the joke was, why did the woman wear a helmet at the dinner table? Because she was on a crash diet. It's a bit of a lame joke, so maybe that's why that guy in the previous video responds a little bit confused. Waiting, well, obviously nothing happens. The experimenter leaves the room and they're just waiting. They get told a story, and the story is the experimenter, it's like before they start actual experiments, the experimenter is quite often also a student. They don't know each other, and they say something like they must have missed the bus to university, they forgot their phone at home, they were caught in the rain with no umbrella. So a bit of an unfortunate event, that's what they share. The compliment is a nice pair of earrings do you have there, or you've got really good hair, what shampoo do you use? Which explains why people feel slightly uncomfortable if they wear a really nice shirt, it really brings out the color of your eyes. Because if a random person gives you that kind of a compliment, you might be a bit off guard maybe. So these are the 4 options. So in the next 4 videos, I'll again show you 4 different videos. You can just choose one of these options. And then I can just give you the percentage of people who give the correct response. Okay, so this is the first one. Let me first go to the next question on Socrative. So you can choose one of those options and guess what happens to this person. Oh, sorry. So what happened? Did someone tell him a joke? Is he just waiting? Did someone tell him the story, or did he get compliments? I'm just waiting to give you a bit of time to respond. So the correct response is someone tells him a story, but 55% of you thought he was waiting, which I get because he doesn't seem to give a lot of response. He's sitting quite quietly. What might give it away is that he does look into the eyes of the experimenter here, and otherwise he might not have done that. But it's interesting that, but 25% of you actually gave the correct response. If you didn't give the correct response here, you're the majority. So keep that in mind. So the next one, what happened to her? Again, give you a little bit of time to answer the question. So 93% of you gave the correct response here, which is that she's waiting. So, and well, the giveaway here might be that she doesn't look, she just looks around it. If someone is actually talking to you, most people will try to make, well, kind of look at someone at least. So the majority of you gave the correct answer here. And what happens to this girl? show it one more time. So 61% of you gave the correct answer, and that said she got a compliment. Then there's quite a large group of you who thought someone told her a joke. 36%, which I understand because she's actually laughing and smiling. So that's, I think, is a very common mistake. And normally, of course, if you try to read someone's mind, you have a bit more background information. Okay, the final short video. So what happened to her? Um, 75% of you were correct. She was told a joke. The others of you thought she might have heard a story or compliments, which I think are quite plausible as well. Okay, very nicely done. So I'll say a bit about the real study. So in the real study, the findings were that both people with and without autism were quite good in discriminating between the target's reactions across scenarios. If you made any errors in this task that I now shared with you, that's not a reflection of your real theory of mind at all. This is not a scientific setting. You're not officially tested. And the fact that many people could do it quite well doesn't mean they were 100% correct. It means that they did most of the trials correctly. And normally in scientific research, they see a lot of trials. I now showed you 8, 2 of each option, but normally you would have several to see whether there's any consistency. So this showed that people with and without autism were actually quite well. They were slightly better in the waiting condition than in the other 3, which makes sense because in the waiting condition, the person doesn't look at the camera, while in the other conditions, the person does look at the camera. So that makes it slightly easier. Moreover, they only got that option where they actually had to guess which one of the 4 options it was. They were also a bit better in the story than in the compliment. So apparently, if you tell someone a story about something, well, uncomfortable that happened to you, then people tend to show a bit more, well, like they feel for you. And if you tell them a really, well, kind of lame joke, you might respond a bit differently. And if they tell you a compliment, you might feel a bit off guard. So that might have a different influence on different people. They got a first choice, so it makes it slightly easier because they could rule out the other scenarios. If you already know that they are looking at the camera, then you know it's not the waiting condition. So then you have to choose between the other 3. That makes it slightly easier. Although both people with and without autism could do quite well, the people without autism were slightly better than the people with autism. So they did have a bit more difficulty in inferring what happened to someone. And in those participants with autism, their performance was related to IQ. And that means that, that if someone with autism has a higher IQ, they might be better at training themselves to learn how to read other people's minds. While in people without autism, that might just kind of happen automatically and is not related to IQ. So this was my talk for today. So in sum, Psychology is a scientific study of the human mind and brain, but we do not teach you how to read minds because human beings can do that already. I hope I kind of showed that. Theory of mind is the insight in other people's minds, and it's very relevant for social interaction. It typically develops around 4 years of age, but in people with autism, it tends to develop much later or not as well as in typical development. And adults can read minds quite well, even if they have autism, although people with autism do slightly as well. But even if you only see a video without any sound for 2 seconds, we are actually quite good at guessing what happened to someone. So I think that's quite insightful. If you have any questions, you can ask them now. You can also email me, but I forgot to add my email to this slides, but I don't mind sharing it with the organizers if you have any questions. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. I think that's, let me stop sharing this now. That's probably the easiest way. Oh, I see there's already a lot in the chat. So I might not be able to answer everything, but oh, there's also a lot of answers in the chat. Oh, okay. Nice. Okay, I'm just gonna scroll down to the end. So if you have a question right now, can you kind of type it at the end? What are the ways to improve one's skill of reading minds? Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I know in autistic individuals, they do have theory of mind training, and that helps quite well. But it helps. It leads to more improvement, but it's not perfect. It's actually something that kind of happens automatically for a lot of people, and it's quite difficult to learn, and it helps if someone with autism, for example, has a higher IQ because they are a bit better able to learn those kind of things. Are there any scholarships? I don't know. Because I'm not, I only lecture at the university, so I'm not really well aware of the scholarships at graduate level at the university.
I have a question, if I'm allowed to ask.
Yeah.
Okay, Marika, thank you. That's a very good session that I have got into learning about psychology. I mean, the deeper psychology, if I get into. I was wondering about one thing. I don't know whether it would be very good to ask in open. I have met some people around. Psychologically, they are very smart. They have a well mindset, well trained, well educated, but they have quite a deceptive outcome when they talk to other people. They pretend they don't understand much, or they're not that very wise or something. What do you call it?
Well, the first answer is I don't know, because I think based on this very brief explanation, I would not even try to diagnose that. But I do think people can have difficulties in quite distinctive cognitive problems. So if you, for example, talk about autism, because that's something I know something about, then people with autism can have a very high IQ. I mean, there's university professors who have autism, and yet they might have difficulties in social interaction. So they might sometimes be a bit awkward in social interaction. And so that's for autism, that the difficulties can be quite specific to one specific field. So IQ, intelligence, is one part. It just means, in general, it actually means how well you can learn academically. But even if you're really smart and your maths and your phonics and all your other modules, they're really good because you're really good at remembering things, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're also good in social interaction and understanding other kind of things. So there's definitely different kinds of topics or cognitions that people can be good or not so good at. I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but
Thank you, Dr. Mary. It was a fantastic session, actually. A lot of questions are pouring in on the chat box as well. I don't think you'll be able to answer all of them. Is there any way to improve my IQ? I'm just picking up a question from there. Is there any way to improve?
Well, yeah, because so if you think about intelligence quotient, that is in essence, it was once developed to test academic learning or to test, actually to predict how well children would do in school. So that means that IQ scores are actually highly influenced by academic training. So someone can be very smart in a certain way, but if they don't go to school, they might have a relatively lower IQ. So yeah, you can kind of improve your IQ simply by doing well or by learning a lot. But it is quite relevant, I think, to say that IQ is also heritable. So you can train, I mean, you can learn a lot, but it also just means that part of it is genetic, which might seem kind of unfair somehow, but it just means that if you don't have a very high IQ, not everyone can go to the university, for example. And that sounds a bit, yeah, I don't know, it might sound a bit controversial. But I think, and also I think IQ is definitely not the most important thing in life, because even if you don't go to university or you can still do very well in life, and other things might be even more important. For example, your IQ might be very high, but if you, well, have those difficulties in other kind of topics, that might make it more complicated. If your IQ is not that high, but you have other qualities like being very good socially, being a very good planner, just being very good at what you're good at, that might compensate for like almost everything. So yeah, IQ is just actually a measure of educational performance. So the only thing to improve IQ in a certain way is, yeah, study. But yeah, I think people are too hung up about IQ, to be honest.
Well, one of our young participants have a very good question for you. He says, Khadija Alam, she says, what book would you suggest for a grade 9 student who is looking forward to study psychology?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it one more time?
So she's from grade 9.
Yeah.
She's asking you, what kind of book would you recommend to her if she wants to take up the study of psychology in her future years?
Oh, what book? I don't know. That's a bit of a difficult question. If you think about, I don't really know any specific broader psychology books. I know, I mean, because that's my field of interest, I know there's quite a lot of nice novels about autism, which are very interesting to read. But a general psychology book, I don't really know, to be honest. I do think if you want to study psychology, I think a lot of people think it's a very kind of social study, but I think it's good to keep in mind that it's very science-based, which means that maths is really important. Statistics is a large part of our studies. So if you want to study psychology, I think that's actually an essential part to do well in statistics and science and maths. But a general psychology book, I don't know. I could look into it, but I don't know the answer straight away. Sorry.
So we have our group CEO with us, Dr. Sandeep Anantanarayan. He has a question for you. Dr. Sandeep Anantanarayan, you're on.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for such an enlightening session. Basically, I've been impressed by what you've spoken, even though I couldn't get most of the questions right. Tushar and I were, you know, trying out everything, and out of 8, I think we got 7 wrong. So very disappointing for both of us. So that's why I asked the question, number 1, how to improve one's skill of reading minds, which you answered very well. But my second and third question relate to something I picked up from the chat. One is there a quantitative measure for this theory of mind? Is there some kind, is IQ the measure, or is there any other measure of this skill of reading people's, you know, feelings?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, the fact that you might not have done very well on this test, it's really not a test of theory of mind. It's a test which we use on a group level to see how well people do on a group level. So the fact that you didn't perform well on this task doesn't really say that you don't have a good theory of mind. So I just want to confirm that that doesn't really mean this, because it's so small, and in daily life you have so much more information. You have information, you have more background information, so you use a lot more information. So it might be that you in your daily life are more dependent on other kind of information like sounds or background information. So just to reassure you that that's not problematic. The tests that are used to test theory of mind, well, in children we use things like the Sally-Ann task. In older children or in adults, it's slightly more complicated because, well, if your IQ is not very low, I mean, if your IQ is very low and you don't really understand a whole story, then it's a bit complicated. But if your IQ is relatively well average, then a story has to be quite complicated to make it difficult to answer if you talk about the theory of mind, because normally you can kind of infer from the rest of the story what would happen. So there is these quite long batteries of tests to test theory of mind, but these are mostly used if you really want to diagnose someone, for example. And I think, so in that way, it's not, I also saw some questions about EQ, emotional intelligence quotient. So I think theory of mind is not so much a test of how well you do. There's not like a theory of mind score, like there's an IQ score. And there's an IQ score because we use that. We use that for schooling, whether someone can go to the university, as an explanation why people are not doing that well in school, why they, well, I mean, there can be a lot of reasons to do an IQ test if there's difficulties in children, for example. With theory of mind, we sometimes use it if you want to diagnose autism, but if you want to diagnose autism, you actually use a lot more. You would never diagnose autism based on only a theory of mind test. So I think theory of mind is more something that's used in science, where you want to study human behavior as a whole, like how can humans do this, for example, as compared to animals. Do great apes have a theory of mind, for example, those kind of comparisons. And not so much at an individual level. So if someone doesn't have, well, specific daily life difficulties or wonders whether they have a diagnosis or something like that, then theory of mind is not that relevant unless it gives you a lot of difficulties in daily life. If there's a lot of social difficulties, then it might be something you want to look into. But there's not like a diagnostic test of theory of mind.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I think we are sensitive about the time of people. So I'm sure the children out here will be trying out your theory on their parents to find out what are they thinking all the time. And Tushar and I and Thomas out here, you know, we married people. I don't think we'll have success finding out what our wives are thinking of us. That it'll require a lot of skill to gain in that area. Yeah. We are losers from the start, but again, thank you so much. Tushar, off to you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep. It's 12:02, and as you know, we only allotted 1 hour for this. I know there are flooding of questions in the chat box, so please, everyone who has questions for Dr. �W𝐚𝐫𝐢𝐞𝐤, we can always reach out to her. I have put in the email address info@edukopathways.com. There's been a lot of queries about how to get admission into University of Nottingham. That's a good sign. Again, info@edukopathways.com is your email address where you can go. We have also shared the response link. We need to fill up that response link in order to get, for us to give you some sort of a certification for today's program from University of Nottingham, Malaysia. So thank you so much, Dr. �W𝐚𝐫𝐢𝐞𝐤. I would also like to thank Z here, my whole team, for organizing this. We'll be coming shortly back with another session. So all of you will reach out to you as we did for this program. And with that in mind, I think for now today, thank you so much. Thank you once again. Dr. �W𝐚𝐫𝐢𝐞𝐤, if you would like to conclude with something.
Me, I really enjoyed this.